Good morning. So, are you afraid of the dark? No one will ever admit to it, right? Not even little people. Are you afraid of the dark? So, you're probably not afraid of the dark, but you might know somebody who's afraid of the dark. And why are they afraid of the dark? Oh, everyone had an answer. What are those?
Had a bad experience.
Oh, right. You had a bad experience? Well, you can't see. You don't know what's there. And when you don't know, that's a little bit uncertain. Afraid of the dark. Well, we'll talk about darkness today. And let's start right in the beginning. If you want to follow along, you can get a Bible handy. And the first place we'll look is the very first page of the Bible, so it's easy to find. In Genesis, the very beginning, in the beginning it says in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. You've heard that, but look at the second verse. The earth was without form and void, and darkness covered the face of the deep. So before God got to work, all there was darkness, nothing else. It must have been pretty gloomy. Just imagine the whole world being dark. Also notice that the first thing that God did, down in verse 3, God said, first time we hear him talking, "Let there be light." The very first thing God did was make a hole in the darkness. And then he separated, divided light and dark. And you know how the story went. But here's something interesting. Go all the way to the back of the book now. The very last chapter, the very end of the story in Revelation 22. This Bible has a lot of pages at the end, so it's hard to find that last chapter of the book. We started in the first chapter, and we're in the very last one, Revelation 22. And John here's got a picture of, the world made new after God fixes it over. He showed me here, just Revelation 22, verse 1, he showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding from the throne of God. And in the middle of the street and on either side was the tree of life, which bore 12 fruits. The leaves of the tree were for the healing of nations, and there shall be no more curse. But the throne of God and the Lamb shall be in it, and they shall see his face, and his name shall be on their foreheads, and there will be no more night there. The book opens by saying that God made light to dispel or to make a hole in the darkness. And the very last chapter says that in the world made new, there's no more darkness. God seems to be working against the darkness. Interestingly, you might have heard me say this other times, you'll notice that the description of the earth in the beginning was, the world was covered in darkness, and the earth was covered with water. And in Revelation, if you read on that last chapter, it says there's no more ocean at the end. So the two problems that were there, the earth as God found it or started with, darkness and the sea, and the world made new, there's neither. Just for fun. Well, darkness, you find darkness as you keep reading the Bible along the way. Here's another time, it's sort of interesting. When the children of Israel were leaving Egypt, there was plagues on those that weren't following God, those that were opposing him. And one of the plagues was darkness. Darkness for 3 days, if I remember right. We could look it up, but I'm going to try to make this quick. Darkness for 3 days, and it says that it was so dark you could feel it. That's really dark. If you go to the end of the story, if you look in Revelation 16, you'll find that at the end of time, One of the plagues is darkness. But it's only for those who don't follow God. It's only for those who don't follow God. In both cases, darkness is a tool God uses to show what it's like to be without Him. Without Him, there is only darkness. When you get a taste of it, it's terrifying. But you remember that scene at Mount Sinai? All the people are gathered, and God wants to talk with them. And He comes down on the mountain. And if you look at Deuteronomy Chapter 5, Moses is recounting the experience years later to the kind of the second generation Israelites. Let's look at Deuteronomy Chapter 5. And let me see if I can find the text. I can dig it up if we need to. Where's my papers gone here? Here we are. Deuteronomy chapter 5 and verses 22 and 23. The Lord spoke these commands, that's the 10 Commandments, in a loud voice to your entire assembly from the fire, the cloud, and total darkness on the mountain. He added nothing more, and He wrote them on the 2 stone tablets and gave them to me. All of you approached me with your elders and leaders when you heard the voice from the darkness while the mountain was blazing with fire. And we'll leave it there. But here's something interesting. If God is dispelling darkness, it's interesting that when He comes to speak to the people, He's shrouded in darkness. There's other places where it says the darkness is beneath His feet. I thought about trying to picture the scene there that's described in Deuteronomy 5:22. How can you have a mountain on fire, but yet there's total darkness? It's hard to picture how that worked. The mountain was on fire, but somehow the voice of God came out of darkness. And there's quite a few others here that describe the same thing. Solomon built the temple, and when he was dedicating it, the first thing he says in 1 Kings is, the Lord said that He dwells in total darkness. And then David, after he's rescued from Saul, and, rescued from Saul. When Saul has been defeated, let's say that, he writes Psalm 18. You can find it both Psalm 18 and also in 2 Samuel. And he is trying to, in some way, capture the bigness and the magnificence of God. And I'm just going to skip down to verses 9 and on here. Let's start with 7 to get the picture. David's trying to create somehow a way to visualize how big and mighty God is. Look what it says. Psalm 18, verse 7. The earth shook and quaked. The foundations of the mountains trembled. They shook because He burned with anger. Smoke rose from His nostrils. Consuming fire came from His mouth, and coals were set ablaze. He bent the heavens and came down. Total darkness beneath His feet. He rode on a cherub and flew, soaring on the wings. He made darkness His hiding place, storm clouds His canopy around Him. From the radiance of His presence, His clouds swept onward with hail and blazing coals. And we'll leave that there. David writing further in Psalm 97, and there's more. I'm just giving you kind of a sample here. Psalm 97, just in the beginning, once again, David trying to create an image of the majesticness of God. The Lord reigns, let the earth rejoice, let the many coasts and islands be glad. Clouds and total darkness surround Him. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of His throne. Fire goes before Him and burns up His foes on every side. And we'll stop there. You could read on. The entire psalm has to do with the majesty of God. So if God dispels darkness, and the first thing He did was make light to overcome the darkness, and John the disciple writes in his book that The world was in darkness, and Jesus came to introduce light, that being more spiritual darkness. But yet, God here says he dwells in the darkness. Does he like darkness? I think not. These are all writings that try to depict how great God is, and the idea of darkness is that God is a mystery and a power that's too much for us, that we can't completely see or understand. And that aligns with what Paul says in the books of Corinthians, in both of them, that now we see darkly, but later we will see clearly. The idea is that God is too big, he's too powerful for us to comprehend, and I think the writers use darkness to describe that bigness and that inability for us to completely comprehend God. Not so much that God likes darkness, but notice something else about God says. Now, Job, the book of Job, and throughout the book of Job, I think it talks more about darkness than any other book of the Bible. I'm just going to share a few from chapter 38. You probably know about Job 38. Once again, God speaking to Job, trying to show Job that, well, Job thinks he's pretty good. He's pretty big stuff. God says, well, I have a few questions for you. I'm just going to share a few here. Job 38, if you want to go down to verse 8. God asked Job, who enclosed the sea behind doors when it burst from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and total darkness its blanket. That's back to that picture of creation, right? There was impenetrable darkness covering the earth, and there was the ocean. And God says, well, are you able to keep the ocean where it belongs, or cover the earth in darkness, or conversely, cover it in light? And of course, the answer is rhetorically, no. Job couldn't do that, and neither can we. But keep on going. God keeps asking questions. Let's go down to verse 16. Have you traveled to the source of the sea, or walked in the depths of the ocean? Have the gates of death been revealed to you? Have you seen the gates of deep darkness? Have you comprehended the extent of the earth? Tell me if you know all this. He keeps going. Where is the road to the home of light? Do you know where darkness lives, so you can lead it back to its border? Are you familiar with the paths to its home? Don't you know? You were already born. You've lived so long. A bit of sarcasm. You don't think of God being particularly sarcastic, but he is here. But let's turn it around. More than explaining to Job his position in relation to God, what God is saying is that God knows where the gates of darkness are. He knows how to put borders on it. He knows everything that's happening in the darkness. Darkness doesn't bother him at all. John, writing much later, the Apostle John says, God is light, and in him there is no darkness. Darkness doesn't have any effect on God. You see, we might be afraid of darkness, or maybe know somebody who's afraid of the dark. A better way to say it, and we talked about why God is not afraid of the dark. He knows everything that's happening in the darkness. That came out earlier in the book of Job, in chapter 12. Let's go back there here if I can find it. I guess I've got my papers kind of mixed up. Here we go. Job, chapter 12. We'll go down to verse 21 and read through the end. Job chapter 12. He pours out contempt on the nobles and disarms. This is someone talking about God. Job talking about God. He pours out contempt on nobles and disarms the strong. He reveals mysteries from the darkness and brings the deepest darkness into light. He makes nations great and then destroys them. He enlarges nation, then leads them away. He deprives the world leaders of reason and makes them wander in the trackless wasteland. They grope around in darkness without light. He makes them stagger like a drunkard. Point being, God knows everything that's going on in the darkness. The darkness is not impenetrable to him. For him, it's nothing. Let's see what Isaiah has to say. You can turn to Isaiah 45. This is an interesting an interesting description or discussion. This is God talking to Cyrus, before Cyrus is born, of course. And Cyrus, the king of, well, ultimately the king of Persia. And God, ahead of time, Isaiah records a message for Cyrus quite a while before Cyrus is even born. Here's what I'm after, though, kind of thinking about darkness today. Down in verse 5, God says, I am the Lord, there is no other. There is no God but me. I will strengthen you, though you do not know me, so that all may know from the rising of the sun to the setting that there is no one but me. I am the Lord, there is no other. I form light, and I create darkness. He's in control. God is in control of the darkness. He goes on to finish off. I make success and create disaster. I am the Lord who does all these things. Well, so God not only dispels darkness, he is completely comfortable in darkness. He claims to have made the darkness. Now here's something interesting over in the book of Daniel. You remember Daniel, we kind of really get to know Daniel shortly after he's arrived in Babylon. And he's gone to wise man school, I guess you'd say. And now the king has this dream, Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And he's kind of upset about the dream. And ultimately declares, in chapter 2 here, that all the wise men be killed because they're kind of exposed as a fraud. They can't tell him his dream or help him. And Daniel does a sensible thing. He goes in his closet and he prays and says, Lord, we're in a real big jam here. They're coming to execute us tomorrow. We could really use some help right about now. And then he goes to sleep and he has the king's dream. And he's pretty happy about that, as you can imagine. Look at verse 19 of Daniel 2. The mystery, that is the dream, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision at night. And Daniel praised the God of heavens. If you were set to be executed and God solved the problem, or if I did, I know at least for me, I would be busy praising him as well. That would be good news. So Daniel declares here in verse 20 and on, may the name of God be praised forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and he establishes kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals the deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. And I'll stop there. Daniel keeps going. God knows what is in the darkness. Now, people are always afraid of the dark. Sometimes people like it when it's dark. In fact, back to the Apostle Paul, he writes a lot about light and darkness too. And right there after the famous verse in John 3:16, just 4 verses later, he says that, well, people like the darkness because the darkness hides their deeds. Right? Sometimes, if you want to hide something, darkness can be a help. Let's say you've got a little plan that isn't quite entirely honest. That's where darkness helps. In fact, there's a story just like that in Ezekiel. God brings Ezekiel to Jerusalem to show him what's going on in the temple. And I'm just going to give you one little part, but it kind of illustrates what I'm trying to get to here. Ezekiel chapter 8 and down in verse 10. This is Ezekiel writing. God's taking him on a trip to look at the temple. He says, I went in and looked, and there engraved all around the wall was every kind of abhorrent thing, crawling creatures and beasts, as well as idols. On to verse 11. 70 elders from the house of Israel were standing before them, that is the idols, with Jazaniah, the son of Shaphan, standing among them. Each had a fire pan in his hand, and a fragrant cloud of incense was rising up. And he said to me, Son of man, he being God, Son of man, do you see what the elders of the house of Israel are doing in the darkness, each at the shrine of his idol? For they are saying, the Lord does not see us. The Lord has abandoned this land. We'll stop there. These were religious leaders in the temple worshiping idols, thinking that they were in the dark and no one would see. But what have we just read? What did Daniel just say? God knows everything that's going on, even in the darkness. Another text from Job I'll just share with you here, where this point is made clear. Job 34 at the end of the chapter says, for his eyes, God's eyes, watch over a man's ways, and he observes all his steps. There is no darkness, not even deep darkness, where evildoers can hide. God does not need to examine a person further, that one should try to approach him in court. God knows everything that's going on. He sees me and everything I'm doing. And that's a bit sobering. That brings us along to our scripture reading today. We'll just read it again. 1 Corinthians chapter 4. Paul's the person speaking here. A person should think of us, that would be him and his entourage, should think of us in this way, as servants of Christ and managers of the mysteries of God. In this regard, it's required that managers be found faithful. It's of little importance to me whether I should be judged by you or any human court. In fact, I don't even judge myself, for I am not conscious of anything against myself, and I'm not justified by this. It is the Lord who judges. So don't judge anything prematurely before the Lord comes. And I'm going to change the wording just a little bit here to make it more clear. Don't judge anything prematurely, because when the Lord comes, he will bring to light what is hidden in the darkness and reveal the intentions of the heart. And praise will come to each one from God. Paul's saying that, by and by, God knows what's going on right now, but there'll come a time when he will bring to light the intentions of everyone's heart. He's going to bring the intentions of my heart to light. Well, that's a little more worrisome in a way, because sometimes I'll have to say my intentions haven't been exactly what I'd want everyone to know. Maybe that's the way it is for you too. Jesus, talking to the crowd in Matthew 12, kind of speaks a little bit to this same point. He talks about the tree and its fruit. Let's see. Kind of upbraiding some people who maybe weren't entirely honest. Look at verse 33 of Matthew 12. Either make the tree good and its fruit will be good, or make the tree bad and its fruit will be bad, for a tree is known by its fruit. Sure, you've heard that. You brood of vipers, how can you speak good things when you're evil? For the mouth speaks from the overflow of the heart. A good person produces good things from the storeroom of good, and an evil person produces evil things from his storeroom of evil. I tell you, on that day of judgment, people will have to account for every careless word they have spoken. For by your words you will be acquitted, or by your words you will be condemned. So these aren't necessarily words that have come out and been spoken to somebody, because a lot of times you talk to yourself, right? It's what's going on in your brain. And Jesus says, God knows what those words are. And like Paul, there'll come a time when that is made known. Well, this brings us to Santa Claus. My mom liked Elvis Presley. There might be a few people here old enough to know who Elvis Presley is. This is back when singers could actually sing, for you teenagers who are here. So Elvis sang a song, right? And you've heard it. Santa Claus is coming to town. You know how the song goes. You better watch out. You've heard that, I'm sure. What does it say? You better watch out. You better not cry. You better not pout. I'm telling you why. Santa Claus is coming to town. He's making a list, checking it twice. He's going to find out who's naughty or nice. Santa Claus is coming to town. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows when you've been bad or good. We'll stop there. That sounds a little bit like God in a way, isn't it? What we've just read today from the scripture, there's nowhere that I can hide. He sees me when I'm sleeping. He knows when I'm awake. He knows when I've been bad. He knows when I've been good. He knows when I'm happy. He knows when I'm sad. A lot like the legend of Santa Claus here. Well, some people, if you've been around Christian churches very much, some people get pretty worked up about the end of that verse in the song, so be good for goodness sake. But there's a point here. There's a point here. The guy that wrote this little article, I wanted to find the lyrics, so I'd get them right when I read them to you. And there was a Christian article about this, and he has a good point. He says, if you asked any child whether they've been bad or good, would you ever expect to get a response like this from the child? Well, actually, to be honest, I'm really struggling with this whole being nice thing. Actually, I've been pretty pouty, and yesterday I even screamed. It just isn't working out this Christmas, so I suspect the bicycle will have to wait. That's probably an honest answer, but would you really expect to get that from anybody? No, because you see, our instinct when there's somebody watching is to shape up and be good, right? Our instinct when somebody's watching is to shape up and be good. And if somebody asks for an assessment of how I'm doing, well, what does it say? Hi, how are you? Fine, yeah, good, great, fantastic. And by the way, I'm a liar. Because, well, there might be a few days where you're really good, things are going great. But then, if you're like me, there's other days where maybe it's not. Things are a little bit of a struggle along the way. So that's the reason why people get, some authors get worked up with this song. They say, well, the idea of Santa Claus, sort of motivates a performance mentality, that I better convince Santa Claus I'm good, otherwise I'll never get the bicycle. So the reason I brought up Santa Claus here is the idea of an all-seeing, all-knowing God, or in this case, a Santa Claus. My first instinct is, well, I better convince them that I'm good. I hope you can see the oxymoron in that idea. Wait a minute. If this is an all-seeing, all-knowing person, I'm never going to convince them of anything. But I try sometimes. Maybe you do too. Think of this. If all of a sudden you find out people are coming over to your house, right? What do? Clean up, exactly. I'm right there with you. Right? Unless, of course, I don't know, you're an idiot. Let's be honest. Right? If someone's coming over to your house right away, you grab all the junk that's laying around on the sofa and the table or wherever and put it someplace in the darkness where no one will ever see it. And sweep up a little bit, and jam stuff in the refrigerator and, wipe the junk off the kitchen counter just before they get there. Why? Exactly. You want them to like you. Did you hear this sermon before? You want them to like you. Really, what you're trying to do is create an image of yourself that isn't necessarily true. Because if they showed up before then, they might have seen, the junk on the sofa and the table. And, if you ran over to my house right now, you'd find stuff scattered around the table and here and there. I'll be honest. I did do the dishes, so you wouldn't find anything in the, around the sink. Or maybe it's this way. In the Old West, there were really, really rudimentary buildings. People didn't spend a lot of time, and so you'd see a small little, a ranch-style house, but the front wall was really big, maybe 2 or 3 stories, even with false windows up there. That was the facade, right, on Main Street for a business. It was a big square front if you went around back. If you don't believe that, just go to some of those Old West towns. You can see them to this day. The front's a nice, square, fancy-looking business, but inside it's just a little building behind it. Why? Well, because the proprietor wanted everyone to think it was a prosperous business. We don't have that in New England. Here, we do something different, right? When it comes time to paint the house, which side do you paint first? Sometimes that's as far as people get, right? Because, you want people to like you, she says, right? You're creating you want to have people think something of you that might not entirely be true. Now, those are old-fashioned ways. The modern way is to get an account on Facebook, or if you're younger, maybe Instagram or TikTok or someplace. It used to be Facebook was for the young people, but that was about 15 years ago. So I've been told. So, because you see, once you're on Facebook, you can make people think whatever you want about you, right? I take pictures of things when it looks really nice, right? When the family's all dressed up and the kids actually look good before they rip their clothes or whatever, or gotten them dirty, and when they look all cherubic and well-behaved and all that, you get a picture and put that on Facebook. I think. I don't do much with Facebook. But a lot goes on there about creating an image for people to see of me. Where does that whole instinct to paint only the front side of the house or tidy up the house when people are coming over come from anyway? It's all about deceit. It's all about I'm going to make myself better, or at least look a little better than I really am. You see, that's why I brought up Santa Claus, because this idea of Santa Claus, there's 2 ways I can react to it. Somebody who sees me all the time and knows everything about me. The first reaction I can have is like the song suggests, so be good for goodness sake. You better straighten up so that the all-knowing Santa Claus, or I'm preaching today from the Bible, the all-knowing God will think well of me. In the case of Santa Claus, you're trying to get a gift. So there's a bit of a transaction. But this problem is especially pervasive. Before I go on, I should actually suggest the other way. The other alternative to facing this is to be completely upfront, kind of like the funny little response of a child here of being straightforward. I actually don't necessarily have it all together. Things actually aren't perfect. I'm not always nice. And I could really use some encouragement in that direction. That's more honest, and it probably will produce a better result. The instinct to make a better facade, make a better image for me, is especially pervasive in Christian churches, right? Because if you go to a Christian church, everyone's supposed to be, well, just one rung down on the ladder on the way to heaven. Just one or two more rungs and we're there. So we must be pretty good people. So everybody dresses up nice and comes to church and acts really good while they're here, at least most of the time, so that other people will think that they're just that one rung away from heaven. But what we just read about God here in all those texts I've read you is he's not fooled. He sees the dirty. He sees what's in our heart. He knows the words that we'd like to say when we smile and say something polite and nice. Look at Luke 12, and then we'll end off with the benefits of the alternative here. Luke 12, the first 3 verses. Luke 12 says this: "Meanwhile, a crowd of many thousands came together so that they were trampling on each other, trying to get to see Jesus. Then Jesus began to say to his disciples first, 'Be on your guard against the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy.'" You know where the word hypocrisy came from, right? You've seen those masks like they have when they're around theaters. You put a mask in front of your face to capture the emotion that the actor is trying to portray. So the idea of hypocrisy is putting on a false front. So Jesus says to the disciples first, "Be on your guard against the leaven of the Pharisees." It doesn't say be on your guard against the Pharisees, but be on guard against their hypocrisy. And then he goes on in verses 2 and 3, which I think are the part that might be useful to us. "There is nothing covered that won't be uncovered, nothing hidden that won't be made known. Therefore, whatever you have said in the dark will be heard in the light, and what you have whispered in the ear in private rooms will be proclaimed on the housetops. Your dirty laundry will be aired," to use a modern metaphor. My dirty laundry will be aired. I have 2 reactions. One, try even harder to maintain the fiction that I've got it all together. Or 2, be vulnerable and invite those around me to encourage me in the pursuit of growth. You see, if I'm authentic, if I'm honest, if I let you know that the back of my house looks just as good as the front, or maybe the whole thing's a wreck, or that maybe I don't have it together, maybe the house is usually a mess. I use that because I do construction work. I often end up in people's houses. They don't clean up when, the construction guy's coming. So I see it how it really is. If I'm straightforward and when you ask me how I am, I say, well, it's really been a struggle. Then maybe you can pray for me. Maybe you can encourage me. If I let you know that actually I've screamed at 4 people this week and I don't really feel good about that, I'm pretty unhappy with it, maybe you can help me overcome. You see, with that method, there's a whole lot less stress because I don't have to try to maintain something that's not true. Not only that, I think my relationship with everybody around me will go a whole lot better. Because trying to put on a front is the fastest way to wreck a relationship there is. Not only that, I'll get more respect because you'll find that authenticity, to be honest, to be true, to be forthright, always garners more respect than the effort to put on a front, which everybody can see right through anyway. You get more respect for being honest. And as I've already mentioned, the biggest benefit of all to method number 2, or reaction number 2 to an all-seeing God is if I'm honest about who I really am, then I have the opportunity to grow. If I expend my effort trying to convince you all of something that's not true, then I don't get to grow. You find this entirely through the book of Proverbs. It comes out this way, that those who are, there's 4 women in the book of Proverbs. May or may not know that, right? There's wisdom and virtue, or wisdom, the woman of wisdom. There's the woman of folly. There's the promiscuous woman, and there's the wise woman at the very end. 2 sets of opposites. Wisdom always accepts advice. Wisdom is always humble because that's how you get to be wise. You grow when you're authentic. So, all the way from darkness to how I get along with people by way of Santa Claus, in a way, hopefully you'll remember it that way. The whole point is we serve a God who knows every last thing about us and sees every last thing we think or do. And when I find out that I'm kind of ashamed about a lot of the things I do, think, and say, let me choose the way where I put that all before him and say, yeah, you know what, God, things are a mess. I don't deserve anything. And would you help me? Would you help me? Would you change me and make me more like what you want me to be? I think our closing song is number 515.